Hey guys, this is Brooklyn, Zach, and Aerith, and we're going to be covering the Eighth Amendment. So here we go. The Eighth Amendment is, as portrayed, a statement declaring that no cruel or unusual punishments shall be inflicted upon those who are on trial for their crimes. The purpose of this video is to explain the history and the reasoning for this clause, its purpose, and how it is applied in court today. After centuries of torture, paranoia, and prejudice being factors heavily affecting the punishments of criminals, it came to a point where the court had to make a change. From the beginning of time, forms of punishment have been used to right wrongs, teach lessons, or even change minds. Often these actions were unnecessary and crueler than they needed to be. These punishments ranging from the stocks to the electric chair to tactics such as tarring and feathering or being burned alive. While penalties changed and evolved over time, we could still see cruel and unusual punishments taking place in court, such as excessive bail, excessive prison time, and even placing the defendant in inhumane conditions. People were increasingly suffering and paying higher prices than they should have. Not only was excessive punishment used in law, but could be used by the government to oppress and spread their influence, as well as to extort confessions. For these very reasons, the Eighth Amendment was added into the Constitution, not just to protect those on trial, but to limit the power of the federal government as well. Since its placement into the Constitution, this amendment has been impacting the court and protecting those on trial in various ways. As stated beforehand, it prohibits excessively harsh and unnecessary penalties from being used on the defendant, and it also forces the court to take several various factors into consideration. These factors ranging from ensuring that the one on trial is psychologically and mentally intact, to ensuring that others in the same jurisdictions are given similar sentences. Severity of offense is another factor that is taken into consideration. These factors must be weighed and measured in order to make sure that the sentence and penalty is proportionate to the crime and appropriate for this particular defendant. And now on to Zach.
So now that we've talked a little bit about the history of the Eighth Amendment and what its intention is, let's talk about a few areas of implementation that the Eighth Amendment covers. The first of which is going to be in regards to the age of offenders. The second is going to be in regards to beatings within the prison system. The third is going to be in regards to conditions of confinement. And finally, we're going to talk about prison sentences as a whole. For the sake of time, I'm going to be covering the age of offenders and then imprisonment itself. So let's take a look at a few major cases. You feel free to write these down or research them in your own time. The first two that we're going to look at, though, is Graham v. Florida and Miller v. Alabama. These are both cases involving minors. In Graham v. Florida, a juvenile was actually convicted of armed robbery at age 15, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. And this case was taken up to the Supreme Court and actually ended up being reversed. And the Supreme Court deemed that a juvenile who has not committed a homicide should not be sentenced to life imprisonment. And so that case taking place in 2010 kind of set a precedent for juvenile offenders. Fast forward to Miller v. Alabama in 2012, life imprisonment without parole was deemed unconstitutional even for juveniles who were homicide defenders. So Miller, he actually committed a homicide and was convicted, but it was deemed cruel and unusual since he was still a juvenile and was not being judged in adult court. So those are a couple examples of how cruel and unusual punishment actually plays out in the court system and how some key cases actually were reversed. Let's go ahead and take a look now at the bottom one on this next page, which is Solem v. Helm. It's happened in 1983. And this case, it was determined that the sentence may not be disproportionate to the crime that was committed. So up to this point, there were many cases in which the sentence would not necessarily be proportionate. Somebody would steal something of a monetary value and they would be doing years in prison for it. And so this case kind of solidified the mindset that anything that is not proportionate to the crime, any punishment not proportionate to the crime, is actually deemed cruel and unusual. We're going to go ahead and take a look now at another major case, and Aerith is going to cover that.
Okay, a recent case that is related to cruel and unusual punishment is the case of Rogel Aguilera Mederos. In April 2019, Rogel Aguilera Mederos was a semi-tractor driver, and he was driving on the Colorado Freeway when his brakes failed. This resulted in the death of 4 individuals and others being injured. Rogel Aguilera was sentenced to 10 years each for 6 counts of first-degree assault, 5 years each for 10 counts of attempted first-degree murder. On December 13 of 2021, he was convicted guilty and sentenced to 110 years in prison. But why 110 years? This was due to the mandatory minimum sentencing law under Colorado's law. In the case of Rogel Aguilera, the judge had to impose the mandatory minimum sentence law for all his convictions, and they must have to be served consecutively. Around 5 million people have signed a petition seeking clemency for Rogel in addition to the prosecution request to lower the sentence. And Rogel Aguilera requested clemency from Colorado's governor as well. On December 30th, 2021, Colorado's Governor Jared Polis reduced Rogel Aguilera's sentence to 10 years, and he will now be eligible for parole in 2026.
Let me ask you a question. Do you like pizza? The answer is going to be obviously yes. Everybody likes pizza. Let's go ahead and take a look at a rather interesting case of cruel and unusual punishment. This was Jerry Dwayne Williams. He was actually sentenced to 25 years to life in prison merely for stealing a slice of pizza from a pizzeria. You might say, well, that's unbelievable. And it is, but because of California's 3 strikes law that was taking place back in the 90s, I believe, this actually happened. Jerry Williams, he was a convicted felon, and he had 2 sentences prior to this, 2 crimes that he had committed prior to this. And because of California's 3 strikes law, regardless of the severity of the next crime, he was met with a mandatory 25 years to life for stealing a slice of pizza. It's for cases like this that eventually got overturned by the Supreme Court, that laws that our 8th Amendment protects us from cruel and unusual punishment. Obviously, 25 years to life is ridiculous for merely stealing a slice of pizza. So hopefully from our presentation, you've been able to learn a little bit about the history of the 8th Amendment. You've been able to see a couple of different applications of how it works in the real world and seen some major cases involving cruel and unusual punishment. And here are our sources. And if you have any further questions, feel free to ask us. Thank you so much.